The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is charged with the idea of taking the lessons from the past and transferring them to our future.
As stewards of history in the Birmingham movement, the BCRI houses incredible collections that show and document where the community has come from and how the Birmingham movement both came to be and was so successful.
Civil rights and equality challenged today just as they were many decades ago. We are here to enlighten each generation about civil and human rights by exploring our common past, working together in the present to build a better future.
The peaceful protest. They created what we're doing today. They created everything that their model of protest and activism is what we young people look at in order for ours to be successful.
Through many educational offerings, we teach the idea that the changes in Birmingham, Alabama were not just because of Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King and Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth and Reverend Ralph Abernathy. A lot of these changes took place because of the youth in this city. We have BCAP, which is the Birmingham Cultural Alliance Project, where we visit middle school students and we take them through this history and through this narrative so that they can prepare to understand their role in society. Through our Legacy Youth Leadership Program, we bring high school students from all over the Jefferson County area here to study this narrative and to serve as docents and ambassadors to the Civil Rights Institute.
Hello, my name is Megan Millsap. Hi, my name is Mackenzie Millsap, and we are part of the Legacy Leadership Program at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute.
For researchers and local students, from middle, high, and university students, they're able to come in and see where we've been so that they can go and be better stewards of Birmingham and our present and then our future.
Knowing that Birmingham has so much to do and is part of the civil rights movement is going to be very important.
So welcome home, everybody. Happy Jubilee Day. Happy Jubilee Day.
Over the last 29 years, BCRI has been an international leader in the space of civil and human rights. 2020 has brought us a multitude of challenges, but also in that same breath, so many opportunities. The ways in which we've been able to implement technology, but also be innovative, has allowed us to be able to get to this point to where we are today.
It has me excited and it has me ready to see what's next and do something tomorrow. I'm ready. I'm ready for what's next.
Hello, I'm Cheryl Bevel Orange, Director of IT for FedEx Services. I'm pleased to welcome you here on this MLK Day. There are so many great quotes by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., but here's one that I think is particularly appropriate for this occasion. Everybody can be great because anybody can serve. FedEx is pleased to have the opportunity to celebrate the legacy and values of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Our support of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is a continuation of our longtime commitment to be a good corporate citizen. This free admission event is one of many that FedEx is supporting as part of our observance of the Martin Luther King Jr. Day of Service. FedEx is also sponsoring free admissions to the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis, the Mississippi Civil Rights Museum in Jackson, and in Atlanta, FedEx is sponsoring a free admission day at the Center for Civil and Human Rights on February 1st. We also have team members taking part in virtual volunteer activities, such as making flashcards for children about Dr. King, recording audiobooks, and creating quote cards on racial equity. We support initiatives like these because FedEx believes a diverse and inclusive society is a stronger society. And whether you are a volunteer or visitor, your involvement is working to embrace others, build connections, and have a positive impact on our community. We hope your 2022 MLK Day here at the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute is a memorable one. Thank you.
My dear fellow clergymen, while confined here in the Birmingham City Jail, I came across your recent statement
calling present activities unwise and untimely.
Seldom do I pause to answer criticism of my work and ideas.
If I sought to answer all the criticism that crossed my desk,
my secretaries would have little time for anything
other than such correspondence.
And I would have no time for constructive work.
But since I feel that you are men of genuine goodwill,
I want to try to answer your statements.
And what I hope will be patient and reasonable terms.
We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor.
It must be demanded by the oppressed.
I have yet to engage in a direct action campaign that was well-timed in view of those who have not suffered unduly from the disease of segregation.
For years now, I've heard the word wait.
It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity.
Like Paul, I must constantly respond to the Macedonian call for aid.
More basically, I'm in Birmingham because injustice is here.
Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny.
I hope, sirs, you can understand our legitimate and unavoidable impatience.
One may ask, how can you advocate breaking some laws and obeying others? The answer lies in the fact that there are two types of laws, just and unjust.
We have waited for more than 340 years for our constitutional and God-given rights.
I guess it is easy for those who have never felt the stinging darts of segregation to say, wait.
You may well ask, why direct action? Why sit-ins, march-ins, and so forth?
We have not made a single gain in civil rights without determined legal and nonviolent pressure.
The new Birmingham administration must be proud.
The yearning for freedom eventually manifests itself, and that is what has happened to the American Negro.
The United States Negro is moving with a sense of great urgency
toward the promised land of racial justice.
The time is always right to do right.
Now is the time to make real the promise of democracy
and transform our pending national elegy
into a creative psalm of brotherhood.
A law is unjust if it is inflicted on a minority that, as a result of being denied the right to vote, had no part in enacting or devising the law.
Can any law enacted under such circumstances be considered democratically structured?
A just law is a code that a majority compels a minority to follow,
and that it is willing to follow itself.
Sometimes the law is just on its face
and unjust in its application.
Now, there is nothing wrong in having an ordinance which requires a permit for a parade, but such an ordinance becomes unjust
when it is used to maintain segregation and to deny citizens the First Amendment privilege of peaceful assembly and protest.
One who breaks an unjust law must do so openly,
lovingly, and with a willingness to accept the penalty.
We should never forget that everything Adolf Hitler did in Germany was legal, and everything the Hungarian freedom fighters did in Hungary was illegal.
I came to Birmingham with the hope that the white religious leadership of this community would see the justice of our cause.
I had hope that each of you would understand, but again, I have been disappointed.
Never before have I written so long a letter.
I'm afraid it is much too long to take your precious time.
I can assure you that it would have been much shorter if I had been writing from a comfortable desk.
If I said anything that understates the truth and indicates my having a patience
that allows me to settle for anything less than brotherhood, I beg God to forgive me.
Let us all hope that the dark clouds of racial prejudice will soon pass away and the deep fog of misunderstanding will be lifted from our fear-drenched communities.
Yours for the cause of peace and brotherhood, Martin Luther King, Jr.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Realizing the Dream, the Birmingham Civil Rights presentation on this Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. holiday, the year that would have been his 93rd. We are so delighted to be here with you today and host and moderate a discussion. My name is Sherry Jackson. I'm a news anchor at CBS 42 in Birmingham, and it's my honor to moderate this panel on this day in 2022. I want to get to who our panelists are. It's a dynamic group of people from different walks of life, a rainbow, if you will. I'll start with Mr. Nicholas Perkins. He is the CEO of Fuddruckers, and he's also the president of that company. We want to thank you for participating as the chair. His background, of course, with an MBA from Howard University, you can read that on the screen, but he's also deep in community and service with the National Urban League Board of Directors. We thank him for participating in this Realizing the Dream panel. Our next panelist who will talk to you today is Mr. Jeff Drew. Mr. Drew is one of the original foot soldiers. We thank you for being here and sharing your story as you have done for so many years. He's one of the first Black students to attend what is Inslee High School here in Birmingham, Alabama. His family had the honor of hosting Dr. King during those days when he would come to Birmingham to march, a graduate of Morehouse College, now Morehouse University. Next up, Dean Adrienne Wing. She comes to us as a dean for international and comparative law at the University of Iowa. We want to thank her for participating. Her background includes more than 140 publications. She teaches critical race theory, sex discrimination law, and law in the Muslim world. She comes to us with a JD from Samford University. And our final panelist today who will be participating in this discussion is Mr. Lee Sintel. He is the Alabama Tourism Director, and his work kind of speaks for itself here in Alabama. He founded the Alabama Civil Rights Trail in 2004, also founded the U.S. Civil Rights Trail in 2018. These bring people to Alabama from all over the world. He is the author of the official U.S. Civil Rights Trail book. Welcome to all of you, our panelists. I want to begin this discussion today because I think people every year try to figure out how do you honor Dr. King if you don't do it in your life every day. And so I will start with you, Nicholas Perkins, since you were the first I introduced. Tell me how you honor this day and why you're participating in this panel.
Well, I am absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to be here with you all today on such a momentous day. I have always, even as a very young child, viewed Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. as a hero, someone who grew up without a father in the home. I always looked to Dr. King as an example. I was mesmerized as a very young person by his ability to articulate and also his bravery in standing up against those social injustices that adversely impact progress and citizenship rights for African Americans. So as I matriculated, I knew that I wanted to be in business. However, I knew that there was a social component that would be my responsibility as I became an adult, not only to continue the struggle for equal rights in America for those of us who are minorities here, but also to work toward gaining equity in terms of capital. So I consider myself to be a social entrepreneur, and I use the marketplace, if you will, to create opportunities for those that are under-resourced, and that's how I believe that I'm able to contribute and carry on Dr. King's legacy.
I love that. Open the door and I will get it for myself. Just don't block me. I love that as your mission. Mr. Drew, we want to thank you. And I ask you this same question, and I will present this to all of our panelists. How do you honor Dr. King in your life, and why are you on this panel?
Well, I honor Dr. King in my life because I've known him since I was 7 years old. And being here at the house and spending so much time with him and the other members of the Central Committee, I realized how important this struggle was and how much it really meant to him. For me, the most important thing is to continue to repeat the reason why we had the civil rights movement in the first place was for human rights and civil rights and for integrity. Dr. King loved children. And like I said, I was only 7 years old when I met him, but I noticed right away how much he did love children. And for me in my life, I think it's important that I bring that message to as many young people as I can find to let them know that Dr. King lived a life for them. He was trying to pave a road for them for their future. It's very, very important, the sacrifices that he made primarily for children. And you will recall that many children were used in the marches and demonstrations because adults weren't available at the time. We actually wanted to go to jail. We wanted to participate. There was a tremendous amount of enthusiasm amongst the children to participate. And that leadership continues in me. And in fact, it is my destiny, and I'll continue to talk about it to my last breath.
Passing the torch, sharing the story. Dean Wing, your turn. How do you honor Dr. King in your life, and why are you participating in this panel?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here by Zoom from Iowa. I come from a civil rights family that was very active in the North, in New York City. So I was 12 years old when Dr. King died. And so a lot of the civil rights movement I was watching on TV, and my family was talking about it. I became a professor, and I specialize in civil rights law, and I teach a course now everybody's heard of called critical race theory. So Dr. King's work is actually central to my profession and what I do every day. And so Martin Luther King Week we have at our university, I always participate in, and of course I do programs like this. Now I also wear the hat of a mother of 7 and a grandmother of 17. So it's very important for me to make sure that my children, who are now all grown, and my grandchildren, some of whom are grown, understand and carry on his legacy, particularly in these very, very perilous times that we are in at this moment in our country's history.
That historic prism of those of us who don't know our history can indeed repeat it. Lee Sintel, you're on the panel, and I want to ask you the same question. How do you honor Dr. King in your life, and why are you on this panel?
I'm delighted to be here today. I cannot imagine somebody being a 7-year-old kid and Martin Luther King come to your house on a regular basis. I just think it's an amazing experience that one of our panelists had. The only interaction that I ever had with Dr. King, it wasn't really an interaction. I was in the audience when he spoke at St. Jude the night before the march back into Montgomery to the state capitol, where he did the "How long, not long" speech. And since then, I have certainly been a fan of his. And my mother was a history teacher, and so all of this was sort of easy for me. I was very good friends with William Bradford Huey, who is the journalist who solved the murder of how James Earl, not only just was James Earl Ray the only one who was involved in the assassination, but this was his book solved the case, and just not too long after the assassination. But I'm the state tourism director, and our office, I sort of inherited 20 years ago when I came to this position. People are amazed to hear that a Black History Guide was created in the last administration of Governor George Wallace. And because Wallace was elected with Black support in his last term. And so I inherited 20 years later, after the book was done, a book on basically Black churches. And I felt like that was not specific enough to tell people how to get to the sites where the civil rights movement started. And so we created the Alabama Civil Rights Trail. And then several years later, or 10 years later, we spread that throughout the South. And now 12 Southern state tourism directors are involved in the U.S. Civil Rights Trail.
Let me get to now deep into our discussion. We are all, I think, benefactors or beneficiaries of the dream of Dr. King, the sacrifices of the foot soldiers. We sit here today pretty much because of that. I feel this is an important question, and we kind of got into a little bit of a discussion, Mr. Drew, as you lean over to stop that phone, about where this dream is today, the topic of this panel, realizing Dr. King's dream. Are we there yet? This is something I think we approach every year as a question. So I want to present that to you, Mr. Drew. Are we there yet in realizing Dr. King's dream?
No, we are not. We are not there. I remain optimistic, and I hope that Black America remains optimistic, but we are not there yet. In fact, we are diminished compared to where we were 60 years ago. It's a doggone shame that we have not improved in our path to equality and human rights. However, it is not a path that is for Black America only. It is for all of America. In fact, globally, there is terrible discrimination around this world. And unfortunately, it is growing. The conservative right seems to have given some power, some tacit permission to the American public to continue this path of white superiority and oppression. This, in fact, has caused a considerable disenfranchisement in our young people. Can they trust the police? What authority can they trust? And this makes life much more difficult for them to progress through education and for jobs and for family. Life is much more difficult now. The prospect to be treated fairly is very small, and it needs to be addressed.
We know that at the end of his life, Dr. King really was focused on that part of the equality, the economic equality, the Poor People's Campaign. I want to go to you, Dean Wing, on this because what he mentioned about where we are today and some of those mechanisms that have put us in this place as a nation on where we are today with such divide. Why do you think we are at this place today?
Well, racial progress is cyclical, according to the late critical race theory founder, Professor Derek Bell. So we are in one of these troughs in the cycle. We had a Black president. I don't know if Dr. Martin Luther King would believe that we could have a Black president, and a phenomenal man, Barack Obama. And then here we've had a backlash that is so profound. And so there's another reality that's coming, which is in 2040, white people will become the minority of people in the United States. And they're already the minority in certain states. So there is a fear among certain people in certain aspects of the white community that they're going to be overwhelmed by these masses of people of color. So a lot of their backlash and all of the, using arms, threatening to overthrow the government is interrelated to that. And so I think Dr. King would have been really interested in how racism is rearing its head now with 2040 ahead of us. And of course, he was before his time to be focusing on economic discrimination. And as was said in the beginning, I also do international law. And so in international law, we are concerned with civil and political rights like voting, but also with economic, social, and cultural rights, such as jobs and housing and healthcare and things that the U.S. does not have in its constitution at this moment.
That economic part, and so let me just flip up to you at the top of our panel, Mr. Perkins. How important, because I think with the pandemic and where we are today, we are seeing what happens with marginalized communities and people who don't have economic means. It really exposed itself over these last 2 years, but I think we've seen it over time. How important is it that there is something a little more collective to moving people up financially and economically?
I believe that the adverse impact of the pandemic has had a more tremendous impact on communities of color and impoverished communities very visibly. Many of our communities were struggling pre-pandemic, and it was complicated even further by the COVID-19 pandemic. The racial wealth gap in America is something that I have keenly been focused in and around on, and I can not overstate the importance of minority business ownership as a direct weapon against the adverse impact of economic inequality. And, as I address young people all over the country, and especially even in the classroom, I speak specifically about this particular topic. It is vitally important, and I believe that we see even more now that when there are issues such as pandemics and things of this nature, our communities are more socially vulnerable than others. And I believe that we should and absolutely, of course, should realize the advantages and not only the importance of minority business ownership as a direct weapon against economic inequality in America. And I believe that if you look across the legacy of our community, outside of our preachers, our teachers, we had local business people that we could look to that were community leaders. And I think that we have been able to see very clearly the importance of how entrepreneurship and minority communities can help to deal with the problems of the racial wealth gap in America.
I think that the pandemic certainly caused a lot of people to become self-reliant in the sense of starting their own businesses, many wanting to get and needing that additional support to help those businesses grow. Mr. Sintel, for you, the history that people come to Alabama to see, certainly after the civil rights movement, the modern civil rights movement in the mid-60s, there was this victory. But today, when you come into Alabama, if you're not coming here specifically and you know those spots to go for the Civil Rights Trail, you can drive around parts of the state, and there are some stark images that capture people. Driving 65 South, you see that big Confederate flag. I was just down in Montgomery last Friday, and I passed that flag. I passed a cotton field on the right. What is the challenge to you to present to people what Alabama is today as the tourism director when you couch it in the rich civil rights history that is here?
We focus on the successes of the civil rights movement and direct people toward the museums and the National Park Service sites, which are amazingly numerous. Barack Obama did Birmingham and Alabama a great favor in his last week in office when he proclaimed the Birmingham Civil Rights Monument for downtown Birmingham. And at the same time, he told the director of the National Park Service that he wanted more diversity in terms of national parks and World Heritage Sites. The Montgomery region now has 3 civil rights welcome centers that are on the civil rights trail that the National Park Service has now opened the 3rd one, which is on the campus of Alabama State University. So now you have Selma, Lowndes County, and Montgomery that have National Park Service sites that are strictly about the civil rights movement and about the accomplishments. And so we focus on that. And I think by promoting, along with surrounding states, the successes of the civil rights movement, that, we know that we are bringing more people here. And what Brian Stevenson has done in Montgomery, particularly with the newest addition, the new museum, which is 5 times larger than the original museum, that alone is attracting 500,000 people a year, which makes it the 2nd busiest museum in the state of Alabama. And so I think people are surprised and pleasantly surprised at the wide variety and depth of the civil rights museums and locations where they can come and learn more, because of what we say is what happened here changed the world. And Birmingham, the state of Alabama, Montgomery, Selma, Tuskegee really are the heart of the civil rights movement and the civil rights history that people are coming to see.
Dr. King's message of love is something I think that I don't know if people are totally getting that today as in act, but I want to talk about the soul then of the movement and if we really are translating that. And so for that, I want to go to you, Mr. Drew, because people do come to Alabama and they see these sites. Are they getting the soul of the movement? I mean, we have to think Dr. King lived with the threat of death all the time, knowing there was so much hate out there.
Oh, Dr. King, he knew that he would not get there with us. He knew that, but it didn't matter to him. Many people come here. I live still on Dynamite Hill. I'm 1 block away from the home of Arthur Shores, which was bombed 2.5 times. And many people come up Dynamite Hill to see these bomb sites, this Mary Means Monk, Barbara Shore's home, my home. That group now is more 80% majority than it is, and 20% minority. I fuss at the tour people, Mr. Sintel, for not being able to recruit more Black people to come and enjoy and then learn more about this history. We have tourists that come from all over the world here to Dynamite Hill, and most of them are not Black, are not people of color. That bothers me, but nevertheless, I continue to tell the same story, the story of love and the passion that Dr. King had to see this movement through. But we are balancing his ideas against a decreasing value assessment in the Black community. The Black community is not maintaining the kinds of values that we had hoped for. It's almost impossible to fathom that the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church, as horrendous as that was, it may not have been enough of a horror to awaken this country.
The church is important. The 16th Street Baptist Church is a part of the African American Civil Rights Heritage Sites Consortium, 22 different sites around Alabama that really shows the importance of the church in the Black community, in uplifting the moral part of who we are and sustaining Blacks during that time. Where is that today? The church obviously served as so much more. Mr. Perkins, on that part of uplift, on that part of how the dollars help, is there a way to connect those dollars in the heart?
Yes, I believe that it has to be a very concentrated effort and a focused commitment on the business community to invest in organizations that fight, discrimination all over our nation and all over the world. When I think about the thing that really attracted me to Birmingham, it was my junior year in college when I came across a book called The Black Titan that was written about the life and history of Dr. A.G. Gaston. Dr. Gaston single-handedly established an African-American middle class in Birmingham. I, as a business student, was able to see at that point through his example the power of what business and entrepreneurship can do when used as a tool and a vehicle to fight segregation and discrimination. I also saw that it was also a means to an ends for oppressed people. So for a very young person to have had the opportunity to be able to see firsthand what I consider to be our first African-American social entrepreneur leverage his wealth, success, and enterprises to do something to improve the lot of people who look like him. Dr. Gaston's contribution also cannot be overstated. He also invested, as we all know, heavily into the civil rights movement and aided Dr. King and his mission there in Birmingham to continue the fight against Bull Connor and this whole institution of segregation. So I think that there is plenty of examples that have existed of how socially committed entrepreneurs can leverage their wealth and enterprises to stand up against all of those things that adversely impact all of American citizens from effectively realizing their full citizenship rights.
One of the things that's stark about our conversation today is this backdrop that we are talking under with what's happening with the Voting Rights Act in Washington right now. And having this discussion today in Birmingham, knowing that this is something that is out there for Dr. King. This was a seminal moment and highlight in his activist life in getting that Voting Rights Act passed back in 1964. But today, how do we get Dr. King's message through to the powers that be, if you will, about the importance of people feeling at least the enfranchisement and the ability to vote. Dean Wing, I'll present that one to you.
Yes, people understand the power of voting, which is why there is so much suppression going on in each state and why we're not going to be able to get the John Lewis Act through. And that's a deliberate technique to continue to disenfranchise us. The Supreme Court participated in that, or we wouldn't have been having this problem now. So what does this mean for all of us committed to social justice? We have to continue to get more people registered. We have to continue to get everybody who's registered out there actually voting, even though there are going to be some incredibly stark conditions facing people in this midterm election. There are some people in the Republican Party where they understand they are not coming up with an idea that's attracting the majority of people in the country. So they know they can't win legitimate elections. So only through their suppression are they going to try to prevent the majority of the people in the country from making their voices heard. And so we have to keep speaking out and reveal this to the world. And of course, journalists such as yourself and others are very key to that, as all of the civil rights groups, our professional groups, our entertainers, our athletes, all of them have to be speaking out. And of course, our church community as well, to just reveal this and to fight it and to fight it and to fight it.
Mr. Sintel, I want to go to you because the Edmund Pettus Bridge is a big part of the civil rights. It's there on the cover of your book. When people come here, the difficulty of what happened in '64 and those sacrifices, the image of John Lewis that is just ingrained in now another generation of this young man fighting and then being, beaten on that bridge. How do you tell that part of the story when it's kind of people come and they look, they look at the bridge? Is it important that they get that part of the story? And how do you tell that part of the story?
The bridge is a very powerful symbol. When people come to Selma, they know why they're there. They know what happened. And they come for the inspiration that they get from walking across the bridge. Ava DuVernay did America and Alabama in particular a great favor by making the movie Selma. And initially, they were going to film the bridge parts and the march around the Capitol parts in Georgia. And so we developed a relationship with her and convinced her to send a location scout to Selma and Montgomery because, she's a lovely lady, absolutely lovely. I thought that she was very kind in sending a scout here, and her location scout sent word back that you have to film in Selma. You have to film at the state capitol in Montgomery. Because when I had lunch with her one day, I said, you want to make about 30 million Black people unhappy? You use a bridge other than the Edmund Pettus Bridge, because people are going to stand up in the movie theater and say, that's a fake, because that's not the real bridge. There is enormous power in that. And I'm glad somebody hasn't already raised the question about, well, is the name going to change? John Lewis did not want the name to be changed. The people in Selma do not want it changed because they say John Lewis was not from Selma. But it's an amazing power. And that's why that is one of the sites that our office is working with Georgia State University on under Dr. Glenn Eskew, who's a Birmingham historian and wrote a great book for Birmingham, to be one of the sites nominated as UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that's a project that Georgia State University is working on with our support. And we hope that several sites in the next 2 or 3 years will become UNESCO World Heritage Sites. And that will bring even more of these non-white tourist, the non-black tourist to Alabama. Because as those of you who've traveled around the world a lot, you know that people think of a bucket list, whatever the UNESCO sites in that country are, that's what you're going to go see first. And so we're excited about the economic development opportunities for Selma and this part of the state.
I want to talk about human rights here in Birmingham. As much as we have the spirit of Dr. King here, we have that overwhelming spirit of Fred Shuttlesworth. And his, you didn't not get from Fred Shuttlesworth that this is about human rights. This isn't just about Black people. This is about our humanity. And so one of the questions I want to present to our panel today is this part of humanity, and are we really sharing that in a way in uplifting and around the globe? This is something we're seeing with the pandemic. Mr. Drew, you nodded. You obviously knew Dr. Shuttlesworth as well. How important is it that we talk today about in the social justice movement that it is human rights?
It's very important. It's very important. Human rights is something that we wanted back at the beginning of the movement. That was a term that we didn't use very often, but it was definitely the end result. We wanted the world to take focus on human rights. The investment in humanity was a critical part of the civil rights movement. But doing so has seemed to be extremely difficult. Extremely difficult. I don't know where we have lost our passion for human rights, whether it's either in white superiority, whether it's economics, but it doesn't seem to me that we are concerned anymore with human rights. I find more evidence of oppression than I do of resolution.
Would anybody else like to weigh in on that? Dean Wayne?
Yes, as I was saying before, I deal with international law. So for the rest of the world, it's called international human rights. And the United States has never had under law part of what is called international human rights. So what we've had are the civil and political rights, like in our Constitution, freedom of speech, etc. Of course, we haven't even gotten those really given to us. We had to fight for them, but we don't at all. Only under some statutes do we have things like access to housing, right to a job, healthcare. We don't even have healthcare yet. So the U.S. is actually behind the bulk of the developed world and a lot of the developing world in never having achieved human rights. And so this is a disgrace and an embarrassment. And the rest of the world knows this. And I run our France program for my law school. And my French friends are like, you people in the US look like you're about to lose your human rights. You're about to lose your civil and political rights. Your very democracy is under a blatant attack that no one would have even imagined could happen in the United States, but that's what we're facing now. So our human rights, however you define them, are under more threat at this particular historical moment than any of us who are living now could imagine.
Literacy.
And we have to.
Literacy doesn't have the same value that it had 50 years ago in our community. Reading and comprehension, the value of education, the word value itself seems to have lost its definition in many parts of Black America.
We have to imagine that a Dr. King today would be sounding an alarm. And we know in looking back in history that he had this ability to prick the consciousness of people who were seemingly disinterested in the plight of marginalized people. So what would it take to bring together, because it's clear it would take all of us to address some of the ills that we have today. Mr. Perkins, what would it take to bring, you know, the weight of the business community into this discussion in a way that addresses basic human rights, healthcare?
Well, I tell you, when I think about myself and the reason that I am so committed to leveraging my entrepreneurial efforts to improving the lot of economically disenfranchised and under-resourced minority communities is simply because I am aware of the history of African American people. I understand the struggles of people who have been marginalized in our country. I think that there is no possible way that a person who is aware of the sacrifices of what we've seen happen all over the South could not, during their time as an adult and as a professional, not commit any resources to improving the lot of people who have died. As I say this to even my own staff, you know, I get up every day and I work very diligently because of the sacrifices of people who died and did not know my name, right? So I work very hard in that respect. And so I am saddened to know in many instances, because there are so many more entrepreneurs with more vast resources than I do, you know, that don't really recognize nor follow the example of, let's say, an A.G. Gaston, and understand the true power of economics and how it can be leveraged to improve, you know, our lot. And one other thing that I think that people fail to realize is that, you know, when you deal with the people who were brought here involuntarily in chains, dealt with, you know, in very inhuman fashion, lived under, you know, this, you know, legalized slavery for 244 years, and then all that we dealt with during the period of Jim Crow, you look at this 400 plus years of oppression, there's absolutely no way that, you know, in 50 or 60 years that we would have been able to eradicate and erase all of that. So it's going to take every generation to you know, help to lift us up. And I don't always see that level of commitment and sacrifice. And I think that if we're lacking anywhere, it's there. It's just a false perception that we have arrived as a people and that we are so much better off, and that was yesterday, and it does not persist anymore, and that could not be any further than the truth.
That's right.
Well said. Everybody's nodding their head on that. And so I want to get to, let me ask you a follow-up on this, Mr. Sintel. Young people getting this lesson, these civil rights trails that folks come here to see, how incorporated are those trails into what we're teaching children in Alabama?
Well, you can tell that the sun is coming out here in Montgomery. I'll get in a moment to change the blinds. Young people really are interested in what happened here because the whole civil rights trail started when school teachers from Detroit and Chicago brought their students 25 years ago on the Alabama Civil Rights Trail, even though it did not exist as a thing. By the time they come to Selma and Birmingham and Montgomery, they've learned a fair amount, and so they have come looking for the places where it happened. And so I think that is those field trips to Alabama are extremely positive because those are the brightest and the most earnest young people who want to learn about where these things happen, because it's a part of their history, even though it might be their grandparents or great grandparents that were from Alabama or the Deep South. So I think as the national parks become better known and better developed, and particularly as downtown Birmingham continues to redevelop the civil rights district, then more people are going to come and they're going to be inspired by what had happened in Birmingham and hopefully take those themes back home with them.
One of the benefits we have in Birmingham is obviously the Civil Rights Institute, and the trails that take us through and give us a chance to kind of touch this history. Mr. Drew, for you who lived this history, this sort of front row seat to history that you didn't know you were living at the time, but this is American history, not just history for Black folk. How do you make sure that that group of people who come to Dynamite Hill on the tours, how do you make sure that those people know that this is our collective history as a people in the United States?
I stop and do hands-on. I stop, get on the bus. I invite the kids that come up here on Dynamite Hill, those that I've stopped and meet at Kelly Ingram Park. I'd go one-on-one contact. To me, I know that there may be a diamond in the rough, and it's important that young people have access, particularly here in Birmingham, to us foot soldiers that were a part of it, because we're not going to rest in our hearts until we, as you've already mentioned, until we pass this on. And if we can find another Louis Armstrong or another Ella Fitzgerald, some child that is inspired by this, then our life is not in vain. It's just the way that I do it is that I stop my life, get out of my car, and go and meet and shake their hands and talk to them and let them know that I am accessible and that they have met someone that knew Dr. King. We're not ghosts, we're not invisible, and that we are concerned about their future. So I think the answer to that question is you have got to make it a part of your life to stop and tell and teach. There's so much to be taught, and if you can find the attentive ear, that's your cue.
Do we need, though, the voice? And I think we come back to this question all the time at this time of year. Who's the leader?
Yeah.
Who's speaking this?
Yes. I hear this all of the time. Where is the leader? Where's the leader? And I say that the leader is inside of you. He's inside of your own head. You are smart enough to know the difference between Dean Wing. I hear you, good sister. Know the difference between right and wrong. You know the difference. So you don't need leadership to tell you not to walk out in front of a bus.
True.
Unfortunately, and this is the perplexing part. We have got the ability to turn our backs from the obvious. From the obvious. I too run a business. My business, property and casualty insurance, we are in our 90th year. It's been 30 years since a Black man asked for a job, since he applied for a job. 30 years. I offer a career to the insurance industry, but no takers.
And do you think, Mr. Perkins, because you had this sense as a young man that business was something that you wanted to do? Are children being encouraged? Are they learning that there is this path to entrepreneurship for you and you can make a difference for your family, but also your community? Are they learning it?
Absolutely. And I have to say that even as a very young person myself, I mean, I have spent the past 4 years as an adjunct professor in the School of Business at Howard University. And, it encourages me to see this generation of young people that are encouraged to go out and become entrepreneurs. But what I loved more than even their desire to be entrepreneurial, it was the reason why they wanted to become entrepreneurs. They really want to affect change. And they recognize that, as Dr. Gaston would say, what good is money, if it's not going out and serving a social purpose, if it is not improving the lives of people. And there are less and less young people that are less concerned with just sheerly amassing wealth. They are absolutely more concerned about the positive and long-term effects that wealth can have on improving the lives of other people. And so I believe the more that we introduce entrepreneurship to young people, the more that they are going to become more and more entrepreneurs that are sprouting up in minority communities. And I think that we should do that for a number of different reasons. I think we understand very well that those within our nation that are within the top 1% control a lot of what happens politically. So we do understand the power of economics, and we do also understand the power of wealth, and also who controls that wealth. And so I believe as we began to peel back the layers and we began to, as a people, understand the importance of wealth and recognize it more as a tool that can bring about social and economic change, and not necessarily be afraid of it and view it as something negative, we can begin to narrow the racial wealth gap in America.
Then when he talked about those powers, what about the collective power of the people to address the humanity? Are we getting those lessons that collectively as a people, there is a way to unify? We're the products of what the foot soldiers did, and from the modern civil rights movement. We know it took years to get to 1963, but are we getting the power of the people, and what needs to be done that people understand that democracy is about the power of the people?
Mm-hmm. We have a very long way to go before we get ourselves collectively organized. What is wonderful, one wonderful thing about the Zoom world that we have all been living in the past 2 years, and there are a lot of negatives about it, but one positive thing is the power of Zoom and its equivalents, that we can do events like this. We no longer have to all be in one room watching an event, and we can do this globally. And that, I think, especially for the young people who are even more comfortable in all of the social media than older people are, that they're communicating in ways that we wouldn't even have thought of, and that we need to make use of that. I'm in the boomers. Some of us here are boomers. And so we need to be able to listen to our younger people who are saying, hey, look, we've got to communicate in these ways that we haven't been doing. And just a comment about business, as we know, Black people have almost no wealth, which is so stunning.
That's right.
We were the wealth, right? We were the wealth that was traded. Right. And we don't have the wealth that we should have to enable us to be in all of these businesses. And in my particular family, people eventually became teachers and doctors and people who work for the government. But in my children's generation, we now have a whole set of people that are going to business school, that are at banks and consultancies, and I have a son at Apple. And so I tell them, you are our next generation. You're going to take our group of people to a whole nother level that was not even possible for most of the boomers, much less our ancestors. So I think we're not where we need to be, but we have some positivity because of the ability of all of this tech to help us communicate and move forward in ways that was not possible in the past, when we had 3 TV stations and a couple of newspapers in each town or something like that.
There's a lot of information out there. Mr. Sintel, when people come for the Civil Rights Trail, is there something that allows them to get sort of not just the outcome of the civil rights movement here, but the part of it that took this collective work and unity of people from different walks of life coming together to make change happen?
I don't know that there's a place for that specific message, but as I've been sitting here listening to everybody in Birmingham, and I'm in Montgomery, I really wish people in Birmingham would learn more. I'm talking about beyond this audience, learn more about the impact that Birmingham had on the civil rights movement. What happened in Birmingham in 1963 resulted in the Civil Rights Act of 64. And that is the most significant, had more impact because of what happened in Birmingham and because the legislation that the Kennedy administration and then later by Johnson, the impact that had changed the lives of people. Because I'm old enough to remember when we would ride to Birmingham on Saturday with my dad, and I remember when we were going to Loveman's and Pizette's, and I heard, I mean, I was, I don't know, 12, 13, and I knew that Black women could not try on clothes without buying them.
Or hats.
And which, you know, I just find that I found it just bizarre. But because of what the 2,000 kids going to jail in Birmingham did, and which got the attention of the White House, and which led to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. People in Birmingham need to read that and be proud of it and tell visitors that literally what happened, it's not a cliche, it's a great line, what happened in Birmingham changed the world because it changed lives for African Americans all over the country, much more so than probably any other city.
So that year, go ahead. I'm going to let you say that, Mr. Drew. I have a point.
Quick. This is a very important point. One of the signs that was torn down has got a statement by me about when the president, John Kennedy, called Dr. King here at this house and begged Dr. King to stop the demonstrations and to stop the sit-ins. Dr. King hung the phone up on the president of the United States. I was there. I answered that phone from the White House. The next morning, there was a battalion of National Guardsmen here on Dynamite Hill that had been marshalized by the Attorney General, Robert Kennedy, to come and protect us from the police. The president, John Kennedy, was of the opinion, if we can't beat them, we may as well protect them. And that's exactly what happened.
So I like that you said that. I'm glad I paused to let you talk there because 1963 was such a seminal year. It started with the Children's Crusades. So many things happened after that, but it was direct action that they took. Direct action in the fear and facing of Bull Connor with the support of the federal government and Bobby Kennedy sending down that marshal and them working out a deal, negotiating. Negotiations are tough. Are we talking to each other in that regard? Is there direct action? There was a lot of sacrifice in 1963. The 4 girls killed at the church bombing. We saw George Floyd's death. Everybody did, and it pricked the humanity of the world. Has there been direct action?
Not enough. That's what I was saying. George Floyd, Trevor Martin, 16th Street Baptist Church. If these horrific incidents are not enough to draw the consciousness of America, what is it going to take?
And that is a rhetorical question. I wonder for those who are listening out there, but I want to challenge this panel to ask, you know, what is it going to take? We started this with listening to the letter from the Birmingham jail. What is it going to take? I say love. What do you say?
Literacy.
Literacy, action, love. Dean Wing?
Yeah, I mean, education, right? But I'm pessimistic in that I think it was Sandy Hook or that 26 little, I think they were white children.
Right.
Were mowed down, and that did not shock the conscience of America enough to reel in the use of all of this weaponry.
Church bombing since then. Okay?
Right.
And not only against Black churches, but against other religious institutions. Our society is losing its moral character. quickly. And by and large, it's people of color that have this huge sense of morality that we want to try and embrace our enemies, and yet we are still being pushed away.
Sintel, I want you to weigh in on the what's it going to take. We had love, action, literacy, education. What do you say?
Well, my field, of course, is tourism. I think people who come to the South and visit civil rights landmarks, they have already made the decision that they want to know more about what happened and what motivated people to help change their lives for the better. So I'm afraid that by the time people get to Alabama or go to Memphis, they've already made the decision that they care and that they want to see what can be done, hopefully, to make our country move forward a little more.
I guess for the people who are listening to this discussion and those of us who are here, we want that. What is that individual thing that I can do to recognize the legacy of Dr. King, but also to do my part for where we are today, where I don't think anybody argues that there's just a lot of division and people can't hear one another. How do we have difficult conversations with people who are not like us, so that we can hear and understand that, we all have a role to play? What are those takeaways?
Engage. That's an excellent question, but my key word is to engage. Not to be afraid to engage in conversation with people that don't look like you. Don't be afraid to engage others. There's so much you can learn by engaging others. I am so proud of my little Chinese friend that's only 12 years old. This little young girl can recite the entire I Have a Dream speech from memory. And she engages others. This is, I think, our blueprint for success.
I love it. It's powerful. Lee?
I want to encourage people in Birmingham to bring their visitors to the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute. I think what's happening today with this session is exactly what Odessa Woolfolk had in mind so many decades ago, gosh, soon to be 50, I'm not sure. Because my good friend Ed Hall, who was a city tourism director of Birmingham, wanted this to become the Birmingham Civil Rights Museum. And she said, no. She said, this is an institute because the idea is to engage other people and have discussions and have events so that it's not just static. I mean, so I think the more people who go through it, the more people who will be moved by it. I can't go there every couple of years because my grandfather had a service station 2 blocks from 16th Street, and I remember when the bombing took place. But for me to go through the BCRI now, it's painful.
Yeah,
because it reminds, particularly like the 2 schoolrooms, where you've got the black classroom and the white classroom. I mean, that is very painful because I guess it's because my mother was a school teacher, and I've always had a great feeling of fairness. I mean, if something's not fair, then call it out. But I think if more people went to BCRI, so if they would take people with them, those people would go back and sort of spread the message.
That's right.
It needs to be more than 150,000 people a year go to BCRI, and people in Birmingham, and certainly the people who are watching this, can help advance that.
The Institute will celebrate 30 years in November, by the way. Dean Wing, go ahead. I'm going to let you get that thought and then I'll weigh in.
Every, 150,000 go, even if it's up to 200. This gets back to my media point. If everybody won't be able to physically go, everybody can't afford to go, but by using, like, for instance, this is on Facebook, right? This is on the website so that people can visit virtually, even if they can't get there live. And then also it may motivate them to be like, okay, we need to save money. We need to have an organization bring people. But I think it's also important that we link the history with today. I think there's some statistic that more Black children are attending segregated schools where they're mainly with Black people today than there were in the 50s. So these are not just ancient events. I mean, I think when I was 12 or, somebody was 7, if you're saying something that happened even 5 years before, 10 years before, that's ancient. But we're talking about current events,
right?
That even in a school that's allegedly integrated, the Blacks are in one set of classes and the whites are in the college bound, the AP courses, etc. So in our ability to link the history to things that are current today, I think is quite critical, whether we can get to places live or not. And I have to confess, I've never been there. I have never been to Alabama.
Well,
and I'm 65 years old. I've been to 100 foreign countries, but I have not been to Alabama. And it was on our list that we need to go right before COVID took over. And I've had 80 relatives with COVID, 80. So participating today makes me even more determined that I got to go in person. I got to meet you all in person. I've got to bring some of my 17 grandchildren, none of whom have been down there, so they can experience it live. And I'm privileged that I can go physically. I hope, because of COVID, that I'll be able to go and bring family with me.
We welcome you when you come.
Call me at 1-800-ALABAMA and I'll give you a
For sure, I will.
I'll give you the $2 tour of Dynamite Hill.
Yes, it'll be my honor.
We do want to say that the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute educational programs are on Facebook and YouTube, and they are free for viewing anytime. But, like you said, Lee, that there's something about walking through the Civil Rights Institute when you hear those stories and you hear the voices from those days, that there's something that touches you and moves you. And so the wisdom of Odessa Woolfolk to say, we want this to be a living institute that can carry, because I think it fosters the conversations you're talking about, Dean Wing, of how we connect it to today. And we've seen in the last couple of years how very connected that struggle was and is, and how pertinent it is to today, to moving us forward. Listen, we've had a great conversation. We're getting to the last part of it, and I want to make sure that all of you have an opportunity to just leave your final thoughts with those people who are participating in the discussion. Let me ask this question as we do that. We said at the beginning, and I asked how you are living out Dr. King's dream, and why you are participating in this. And so the question of, do you believe we've achieved the dream, is one I want to leave with closing as you give your thoughts on what we can do to achieve that dream. I think we've kind of said it a few times, but I want to give you guys an opportunity to say it succinctly, as you would say it in your own words. And so I'll start with you, Nicholas Perkins.
I believe that Dr. King's dream is a dream that was very vast. I say again that 400 years of oppression, I do not believe can be eradicated in 6 decades. I believe that every generation has a responsibility and a cross to bear to bring forth full and equitable citizenship rights for all people of our nation, and especially those who have been disenfranchised in America as African American citizens. And I believe that we have come a long way, but as our other panelists have said, that we all have a very long way to go. But it is our responsibility to educate ourselves, and then more importantly, make a dedicated commitment and sacrifice to improving our own communities as well, and conscientiously. And there's no way that we can do that without first fully understanding our history and the sacrifices of those who came before us. And I will say that it is impossible to visit Alabama and go through the civil rights tours and go back home the way you left. It is a life-changing experience. It is one that you have to feel, and it is impossible not to feel it once you are there. So grateful and thankful for the resources that our technology provides for us. But Birmingham, Alabama especially is a place that I believe that you must see, that you must feel, and that you must touch. And once you do that, you will never return the same. You'll leave with a very deep and conscientious commitment to doing something to move the people forward.
Awesome. Mr. Drew?
Yeah, God bless you, man. You nearly bring tears to my eyes, boy.
Yes, sir.
As long as we are looking back on these atrocities of the past and not looking forward and being proactive to get rid of this notion of perpetuating hate and teaching racism, we've got to stop teaching and tolerating hatred and racism. We've got to root that out of our lives in its entirety on all sides of the of ethnicity. It's just impossible for us to improve if we are going to continue to react to this, to this, the things of the past, the atrocities of the past. Dr. King's message was a message of hope, and as disappointed as I know he would be, and I agree with Marty, I also know in my heart of hearts that he would remain optimistic. He would not have given up on us. He would be worried and he would be troubled, but he would retain his optimism. We must maintain our moral character as we move forward. We must not subscribe to the evils that we see in the media today and the politics that we see in our country today. We should not lay down with these roaches. It's just impossible to think that we could not maintain a higher degree of moral integrity at a time like this. Again, I strongly believe in literacy. I know for a fact that when gerrymandering has hurt us, but in the early days of the movement, even before the civil rights movement, there was a voter registration movement. And much of that was in reviewing legislation that would give us an insight as to what kind of discrimination was taking place behind our back. There were men and women that spent many hours reading and proposed legislation so that we might find the avenues to fight it. No one is any better than anyone else. And when it comes to law enforcement, and Black folks of embracement or non-embracement of law enforcement, it's got to be reformed. If we're going to have a standard in this country that is going to apply to all people, then it's got to be a standard. Black folks are going to have to depend upon the law enforcement just as anyone else. And if law enforcement can't be uniform in their treatment and in the application of these laws, then they should not be in law enforcement. That's the best assessment I can make, sir. Thank you so much for having us.
Mr. Drew, thank you so much. And Dean Wing, I will go to you next for those same comments, your closing comments and thoughts.
Yes, achieving the dream is just not like on a fixed day. Oh, we've achieved it. We had a Black male president. We didn't achieve the dream. We won't have achieved it if we get a Black and Indian president. We have not achieved the dream that Dr. King said, where he thought little children, could be friends. That's not possible in places, whether you be in Birmingham or Iowa or New Jersey or Soweto or in London or anywhere else. Achieving the dream is a struggle. So I want to end with words of another one of my heroes, along with Dr. King, Nelson Mandela. I wish the two men had known each other. But Nelson Mandela has a saying about the struggle is my life. And he didn't know he was going to end up being the first Black president of South Africa. He thought he was in prison for life. So to me, achieving the dream is a struggle that I will be in, whether I have one more day or 30 more years. It is a struggle that I'm teaching my children, my grandchildren, my students, and other people that I come in contact with. And we will be judged by the content of our struggle. If we're taking the high moral plane, if we are committed, even though it's uncomfortable. And I'm sure everyone that's listening today, and I'll hear this later, and all of you, dear fellow panelists and moderator, we are committed to that struggle.
Yes.
And so I feel optimistic about that. And I feel optimistic that that struggle is not one that we will give up. Our history is far, far too proud a history for any of us to give up on that.
Oh, that's powerful. And Lee Sintel, your turn.
I encourage anybody when you get distressed or feel like things are not moving far enough, or you need something to boost you, go to YouTube and find Barack Obama's 50th anniversary speech that he gave in Selma. I'll read just a couple of paragraphs. There are places and moments in America where this nation's destiny has been decided. Many are sites of war, Concord and Lexington, Appomattox, Gettysburg. Others are sites that symbolize the daring of America's character. Independence Hall in Seneca Falls, Kitty Hawk in Cape Canaveral. Selma is such a place. Selma shows us that America is not the project of any one person, because the single most powerful word in our democracy is the word we. We the people, we shall overcome. Yes, we can. That word is owned by no one. It belongs to everyone. Oh, what a glorious task we are given to continually try to improve this great nation of ours. I just encourage you to listen to his speech. It's 31 minutes, but it's a really tightly written speech, and it's his favorite speech. And the Washington Post said it was his best speech because he wrote most of it himself.
And we were there, we heard it, and you could feel that power in the crowd on that 50th anniversary of the march across the bridge on Selma. I do want to just thank all of you for participating in this conversation. The Birmingham Civil Rights Institute as a way to honor Dr. King and ask the question about realizing Dr. King's dream. You just saw this pop up on the screen, and I want to show this one more time, that the opinions expressed as part of the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute's presentations are solely those of the panelists, and they don't express the views or opinions of their affiliates. Here's the rest of that disclaimer, but we want to thank all of you for joining. Those of you who have had the opportunity to listen online, we thank you. And those of you who will get to see this in the future, past this day that we honor Dr. King in January of 2022, we thank you for taking a moment and pausing to mark this moment in time and learning about what we all can do to make future moments better for all of us. I'm Sherry Jackson. It's been my honor to serve the Birmingham Civil Rights Institute on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Thank you.